thank you everybody for joining us in another of these talks with some of the speakers that are going to be speaking at Barbados SEO. And today we've got Zach Chahalis with us. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So Zach is like you've got like a really super lengthy career, like in the SEO industry. You've been like to lots and lots of conferences, and you've seen mostly everything that's been happening in the industry for a very long time. And I'm going to start from the beginning. Like, how did you get started in SEO?
Yeah. So I was a marketing and finance major in college, and I'd always been a little bit more entrepreneurial in how I approach things. So I originally had a computer repair business, was doing IT work, stuff like that. And I had a client at the time that was asking me, like, hey, I've got a website. It's not really getting any traffic. I know you're a marketing guy in school, and is this something that you want to take a look at and maybe dig a little bit deeper into? And I had really no idea what SEO was at that time. So I started looking at his site, doing some research, digging in, trying to self-train and educate on what was going on. Long story short, he built his entire website in Flash, so wasn't really getting any traffic whatsoever. So I ended up helping him rebuild his site, rewrite content, essentially redo everything from the ground up. And I really enjoyed doing it. So this was probably my sophomore year of college. And I decided, all right, let me see maybe doing this more as a career. So I got into doing an internship with an agency in Atlanta, and that turned into a full-time job with them. So I was actually working full-time while I was still kind of wrapping up school. Was with them till about the end of 2014. I went to another agency in Atlanta called Search Discovery. I was there for about 7 years. And that was where I started to work very deeply with a lot of folks heavy into the technical space. So at that time, we started doing a lot of website replatformings, migrations, technical opportunities, and that really grew my love for technical SEO. So I was there for about 7 years, and I left in 2020, went in-house for a little bit, and then left last June, so June 2022, and currently with iPullRank.
Mm-hmm. I've heard you mentioning there like all the replatformings, and that is the subject that you're going to be talking about at Barbados SEO, and we will touch up on that a little bit along the line. But you were mentioning that, yes, someone asked you to help them with their website, and then you did an internship. How much do you think the industry has changed in all these years? Like,
it's definitely changed a lot. So around the time that I was really getting involved with things, you could still spam backlinks, spam meta keywords, these types of things that a lot of folks were doing back in the day to try and get to the top of page 1 rankings. And then you started getting the introduction of algorithm changes like Penguin and Panda along the way. And, I saw that really cripple a lot of folks back when I was kind of getting into the space. So I kind of came in at this interesting time where you could still get some of these kind of older, more like black hat tactics to work, but also where it's starting to kind of shift into more focusing on, content, having a good website, having, a good technical foundation involved with everything. So it's been really interesting to see how the industry has changed over the years and continued to shift into more things like EEAT and everything that's going involved with having, good website content, building up your entities and your authority, combined with really still focusing on technical SEO. I think that's a big thing that has never really changed throughout the process, but still is a necessary part of making sure that you can perform well organically.
No, that's really interesting. What do you think was the biggest challenge back then, and what's the biggest challenge in technical SEO these days?
The biggest challenge back then, I think to me, was a lot of folks just didn't understand the implications of working with like a .NET framework. And by that, I mean the ability for URLs to resolve uppercase, lowercase, mixed case, spacing. And, there was the idea of the canonical tag and everything that was coming into play. But you were still seeing a lot of folks trying to struggle, especially with their development team, understanding why doing something like that was important and beneficial. And they didn't really see what the difference would be in like, oh, I made this URL a capital A. Like, what does it matter? I really don't care. So it's been great to see more development teams over the years become familiar with at least the basics of SEO or understand some of what needs to happen there, especially in those cases. Today, I still see a lot of folks struggling with technical, but in weird ways. And I think the biggest thing has been over the last couple of years, a lot of folks playing with things like JavaScript frameworks and not fully understanding that, well, yes, Google is getting better at comprehending and understanding JavaScript. There's still a little bit of work that needs to be done there in order for it to be done properly and crawled and rendered. So I see a lot of folks still struggling with that. I also see a lot of folks struggling with just having the websites have like proper structured data, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big thing that I've always been passionate about. And it's very rare that I stumble across a website in the wild these days where I'm impressed by the structured data that I see on it.
Mm-hmm. If you could give like one tip to anyone wanting to get into SEO and start working in SEO, what would that be? Like, what would you tell them?
I think the biggest thing I would recommend is get involved with an agency and be like even coming as an intern level or something like that. I think that was one of the biggest things for me is, starting out playing with things on my own, playing with sites that I was involved with from a personal standpoint, but really getting involved and learning from a group of people that have experience to understand what they're doing. I think I'm kind of a believer where if you don't have much of a technical background, it's difficult for you to pick up on some of the technical aspects of SEO more readily. And I often find that a lot of folks might pick up more on the content side or understand the implications of how content plays into SEO,
Mm-hmm.
but they might not pick up on those technical foundational aspects for maybe 2 or 3 years. So the more that you can spend time potentially in an agency working with a wide variety of folks that have background and experience in the space and can teach you things is extremely valuable. But I'll also say for me, I think the biggest learning opportunity was that second agency I worked at, Search Discovery, because I worked with a wide variety of clients in different industries and fields. So whether it be a hospitality website or an e-commerce site or a real estate website, and getting the opportunity to work with a wide variety of different clients and different problems, to me was very educational and helped move my career along.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really interesting. Do you think it is easier these days to access resources for training than it was like back in the day?
I would say yes and no. I think there are some aspects where, for me, like I learned a lot from some of the various forums and even seeing things like Black Hat World, and whether those tactics work or not, was a good educational space for me back then. Now there's still different elements of education that play into it, and you still have your 101 guides and good courses and things like that, but it really can't teach you things that you would learn by actually doing and experimenting and getting your hands involved with a website. So it's kind of difficult to say like it's gotten any better in that sense, but you need to actually have that opportunity to play with and do something.
Mm-hmm.
I think one big evolution that I've seen is more educational, like university type of programs, including some form of digital marketing. So when I graduated college, there were marketing programs, but it was more traditional marketing.
Yeah.
Here's the 4 Ps, the 5 Cs type of stuff. And they were just kind of getting into the brink of teaching digital marketing. And actually, for the first couple of years after I graduated, they would bring me back in to teach like SEO 101 and 102 level to folks. But these weren't fully fleshed out courses. I'm seeing more of these things come along. But again, it's kind of difficult to even learn SEO within a semester and be able to have the experience to say, okay, I know what to do in this type of site, or I know how to audit a website and see what's going on.
Mm-hmm. What are the best and the worst things in the industry from the perspective of someone that's been in the industry for a very long time?
Ooh. All right, I'm going to say the best and worst thing is kind of the same thing and a little bit of a double-edged sword. So I love the constant sharing of information and education and everything that goes on within the space from like a social media perspective, news websites, things like that. You always see a wide variety of opinions, education getting shared. Like you can always open something like a Twitter and see an interesting conversation around something going on within SEO. At the same time, I can also see some of the negative aspect in that too. You see a lot of folks that are either arguing or, there's an element of like passion that exists when they're kind of talking about these different topics. And it's not a bad thing, but sometimes you see a lot of disagreement that occurs within the SEO space as well. Because I mean, in essence, we're all kind of, I don't want to say guessing, but we're using educated evaluation to kind of look at and say, all right, based on what we've seen in the past, these are the types of things that work. but that means there's not one clear-cut way of doing something.
Yeah.
So sometimes you see a lot of argument or disagreement within the space because people think that, one approach is better than the other. And it's not that either is wrong or right, but, everyone's kind of got their own opinion. And, from an SEO perspective, we're naturally a very competitive group of people. We kind of have to be if we want to perform well within the space because, we all want to rank number one or get the most traffic or have this head term. So there's a lot of that kind of like infighting that seems to occur within the space, but also leads to a lot of good conversation as well.
Yeah, I guess like this sort of like conversation, even if it's a disagreement, it does foster growth and learning in some sort of way. So I'm going to go back into the fact that at Barbados SEO, you're going to be talking about what you learned from performing lots and lots of like migrations and replatformings. Without like spoiling it, like, can you give us a snippet of what you're going to be talking about?
Yeah, so it's really a conversation around working with replatformings and migrations from the beginning, getting involved in the conversations that your team's having, and determining really the best possible recommendation or solution given the circumstances. I think, historically, I've always seen a lot of SEOs and developers get into this kind of like, I'm planting my foot in the ground. This is the only way of doing something type of mentality when it comes to, let's say, a replatforming.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really not the effective way of doing it. So a big part of it is how to work with development teams so that they can understand the value and benefit of the things you're doing. But also as an SEO, how to kind of take that step back and understand where you should focus your energy, what battles you should have, and what are the types of things that can be worked along the way. But combining that with, when you think about a replatforming, it's typically something that the process itself takes months, if not longer than that. I've been in some replatformings that were 18 months to 2 years. That's a lot of time to invest in something, but then that there's going to be potentially a fluctuation period after that. If you're going through a replatforming, you're changing URLs, you're changing the entire architecture of your website, it's going to take time for search engines to understand that change and process it. So even if you do something like a redirect, it's still going to take several crawl cycles for Google to understand that change and really reflect it in SERPs. What I'm going to kind of look at here are ways that you can potentially reduce that timeline cycle that occurs after a replatforming goes live. So that way you can start to get Google to better understand some of the changes that you've made without having to rely on them taking their own time to try and navigate through the site. But also just kind of basically talk through some of the foundational aspects of, here's the things that I'm always looking at with a replatforming, or here are things that I've seen go wrong that you can potentially avoid by having these conversations earlier on in the process.
What's the most challenging thing of a replatforming? Is it having to deal and convince the developers and the technical teams, or is it the process itself of actually replatforming and the things that can happen while that is happening?
I actually would say it's communication. Mm-hmm. I know that sounds like a weird answer, but like one of the biggest things I've always seen is the SEO group is kind of the last to hear about something. And I've been pulled into many replatformings, and it's even with clients that I've worked with over time, where it's like, hey, we're going live next week with this new site or this upgraded version of our platform. And at that point, you're kind of already too late to have the impact that you want to have in something, unless you can kind of say, hey, pause, let's test it, fix it, get everything addressed beforehand. Usually there's a bit of cleanup that's involved in some types of those situations. So really, for me, I think communication is the biggest struggle, because you want folks to understand, hey, if these types of words are talked about, or you start hearing these types of conversations, this is where you need to bring in either your SEO person or your SEO team and make sure that they're aware of everything that's kind of going on. So that way they can give you the proper recommendations to begin with. I think there's nothing more frustrating to a developer than to basically spend all this time, spend an entire sprint building something, only to then have like the SEO guy or girl come back and say, hey, you did this entirely wrong. We actually need to redo this entire thing because of X, Y, and Z. The more that you can prevent that type of stuff, not only does that make your team happier, it also will save you money and will help to expedite the process and make it more efficient. But I think a lot of folks don't don't do that, or they don't know when to bring in their team effectively.
Do you have like any examples of every platforming that you did that it went so well, the whole process, that you would use that as an example?
I do, yeah. So there are multiple replatforming instances, and I can think of both an e-commerce example as well as a lead generation site in the real estate space I work with. And both of those sites, they basically involved us from the beginning. Hey, we're kicking off this project. We want you involved in the kickoff call. We want you to develop baseline recommendations. Here's the platforms that we're thinking about selecting. What's your feedback on these platforms? What are the pitfalls and gaps from an SEO perspective? Then getting involved in things like wireframe and design review and being able to give feedback and thoughts and say, okay, I love how this looks from a design perspective, but we need to make sure that this is developed or coded in X, Y, and Z fashion so that it's crawlable. Really being able to be involved from that very beginning through the point where it's going live, and then having the team be able to listen to the recommendations and effectively implement, understand the value and benefit of doing things, where you can kind of say, hey, we have to do this redirect mapping process. We have to implement all these redirects in this way, in this order. Otherwise, we're going to have this type of impact to our performance. When you can effectively have that conversation with a client and be able to go through, it really helps to make that process be very successful. And in both of those instances where we were involved in every step of the way, it was really great to be able to see not only the website going live and being extremely happy about the project being completed, but then to see the performance impact of it. And yeah, you saw a little bit of a fluctuation period, but it was a narrower period. The more that you kind of listen to your SEO person, the more that you can account for things, the narrower that fluctuation period is going to be. But then we started to see this nice uptick where, 6 months after the site had gone live, traffic's borderline doubling for the site. And it's because they were able to kind of take all these recommendations and implement them along the way, but also begin to address things like technical debt that had been sitting on the site. That e-commerce example, that site hadn't been redesigned in 10 years. So when you're thinking about something like that, it's 10 years worth of debt that they couldn't implement certain things, like let's say structured data around their products, where they were able to effectively do that. And now they've made their site more crawlable and understandable to search engines.
So in the end, it works out better when you work that way. We've been talking for a little while about replatforming. Is that your favorite thing or task to do at work? Or is there something else that you prefer doing?
I will say it's probably my favorite. I'm definitely for lack of better words, like quirky, nerdy SEO, and that I love that type of thing. But I'm also a project management type of SEO, and I love interfacing with clients. So for me, replatformings are interesting because it kind of allows me to play on all of my aspects and skills within my career and be able to say, all right, here's what we need to do from an SEO requirements, dev, technical perspective, but also be able to have those conversations with your stakeholders at a client or their development teams or their partners and be able to kind of talk through all that, but also effectively manage things like time management, processes, and everything that goes along with that. I would say the only other thing that, I'm passionate about really everything in SEO, but the second thing that sticks out to me the most, and I know a lot of my coworkers will laugh at this, is structured data and schema. So usually it's become kind of like a drinking phrase if I mention structured data during a conversation, because it's something I'm very passionate in. I see a lot of sites that just don't do it effectively, and there's always areas of opportunity to kind of max out these structured data scripts and code that we're implementing along the way. And I like my cheesy analogies, but I always kind of say to clients, it's like taking a Shakespearean novel and distilling it to a kindergarten reading level from Google. You take that aspect of something like an entity, an organization, or a corporation, subtype, but be able to mark up everything about that brand, what it does, what it offers, who works there, the social media profiles, everything like that, and be able to see the impact of that in search results, be able to see the impact of that in things like click-through rate, the performance that's taking place there. So that is something that always excites me as well, but I'll be honest with you, there's nothing in SEO that I don't enjoy working with.
Why do you think is it that some companies are still not using structured data in the proper way on their sites? When it's nothing new. Structured data is been around for a while. Yeah.
It is really a good question. I think a lot of folks just don't understand, or they just think it's very basic. So I'll use organization again as an example. Organization scripts can be very complex, but I don't think a lot of folks understand what needs to go into these types of things. So typically when I'm thinking about organization script, I read off a couple things before, but it's always information about the brand and the entity that you want Google to better understand. And one big area of opportunity I always see is something like leveraging has offer catalog, which basically you use to talk about the different services or products that your brand offers and help Google effectively understand, all right, we are this branded entity, we do these things, here's the information about these services or products that I offer, and be able to effectively drive them deeper into the site where they then see more structured data about it. But if you look at Google's documentation, there's not clear information about how to think about something like an organization markup. And it's really just kind of talking about, here's how to mark up your company logo for the knowledge graph. So I think a lot of folks are looking at the documentation and kind of thinking, okay, it's kind of basic, we don't need X, Y, and Z. I think that's a big part of it. I think the other big part of it is a lot of folks either they're not technically minded, and they don't know how to implement these types of things, where even, a platform like a WordPress includes a lot of these things out of the box, but they don't always include it in a way that I would consider to be advanced or complete. But maybe folks don't know how to change or modify that code. So I think that's a big element of it, as well as they don't know how to write it and they don't know what should be included. Whereas I'm normally taking the approach of, I'm going to include every possible piece of information I can in this script and then work my way down from there. So I think it's kind of like people looking at it from their own direction of like, all right, I'm just going to do this to meet the bare minimum, and this is what my platform gives me, versus here's everything I could possibly mark up.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. What's your proudest industry achievement?
I would say for me, it's within the replatforming space. And, there's always so much that you can mention certain brands and whatnot that you work with, but I've worked with a lot of Fortune 500, Fortune 100 brands over the course of my career. And being involved with replatforming some of these sites and not only seeing their traffic maintained, but, sometimes double, if not triple, as a result of the work that you do, that's something I'm extremely proud of. And being able to grow and maintain relationships within the space. I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough when you're thinking about agency SEO. But there's something I'm very proud of in saying, hey, a lot of the clients that I've worked with over the course of my career, I've worked with for 5, 6, 7+ years. And that's not common within the SEO space. Usually you see engagements average about 1 to 2 years. But being able to build relationships with clients and then continuing to add value and growth and benefit to them throughout the course of that engagement, that they keep working with you. It's not one of those things that's highly flashy that you see, folks being able to talk about or brag about on social media. But to me, the relationships I've been able to build and the things I've been able to achieve, that even though they're under the radar from the industry perspective, that means a lot to me in my career.
One of the things that Barbados SEO is about is it's a smaller conference. It's about building relationships. Are you looking forward to coming to Barbados in November to speak?
I am, yeah. So I'm very excited to see the group of folks that are going to be talking and speaking through everything. I've always interacted with Martin throughout the years on Twitter and things like that. So I'm excited to kind of meet him and talk with him along with a couple of the other folks that are there too. But these are the types of things where, you can hang out with your group of friends and whatnot during the week, but if they're not involved in the same industry that you're in, you can't always have conversations with them about, this cool thing I did or this strategy in SEO. So I'm very excited to have conversations with folks in the industry and be able to talk through, for lack of better words, war stories and, things that we've seen throughout the years and kind of things that work for us.
Have you been to Barbados before, or is it going to be your first time?
It will be my first time, so I'm very excited.
And what would you tell to someone who's sort of still not sure about whether they should come or not to Barbados SEO? How would you convince them to come and see your dog?
Yeah. So for me, I would highly recommend coming to check out this conference. The group of folks that are speaking here are some of the top minds within the SEO space, and I'm honored to be a part of it. I think there's going to be some very exciting topics, and having seen some of the clips and sessions from last year where my coworker and boss Mike King was one of the keynote speakers. The conversations that occur there and the learnings and education that you'll get from being a part of this conference are top class. There's really nothing else that beats it, in my opinion. So I'm very excited to be coming to Barbados in November, but I highly recommend for folks in the SEO space to come check it out as well.
Yeah, likewise, I'm very much looking forward to seeing you and hearing you speak in Barbados, Zach. Well, I think like we can wrap it up nicely here. So thank you very much for like having, spending this time with me and having like a little chat.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh.